Okay, so how do we actually summarise information? What does it mean to summarise? If we look at the root word of a summary is an overall view of some information. So a bit like our newspapers that we're looking at in our English lessons, we're looking at reported and direct speech. Now we know that when we looked at the difference between the direct speech one and the reported speech, it was a lot smaller and a lot of other information was removed. And what we ended up being left with was just the key points that were relevant to our police investigation. And the similar concept applies when we summarise something. So it's important to make sure you read the whole text again to make sure that you have a good understanding of what is happening, because you're going to need to summarise that whole text in a certain number of points. Now, your job is then to pick out the key information about the text that gives us an overview of what happened. So I'm now thinking to myself, well, what do we mean by key information? Do I want to know the single facts of the story, or do I want to know all the additional information about how a character said it, or what might have been happening in the background? So it's important to summarise and be very succinct and to the point of what our key information is. So let's consider this example and then we'll explore it a little bit further. So let's imagine you come into school next week. Unfortunately, I won't see all of you, but imagine that we all got to come into school next week. And I want to know what chapter 2 was all about. How would you summarise the chapter in 5 key points? So you would have to need to think, well, I'm going to read the whole of chapter 2. I've now got to summarise for Miss Humphrey what happened at the start, what happened in the middle, and what happened in the end. But you might have a timer of just 2 minutes, or you might be able to only write it down in 5 key points. So then you suddenly have to think, well, I need to make sure I tell her exactly what it is that she needs to know. So this is why it's important to work out what's key information and what's just the additional information that we might not need to know. So when we explore different questions, I'm going to move my face again. So when we look at different types of questions, these are some examples of how you might have to summarise information if you were to do a text or you were to ask some questions. So here I've got an example of 2 different styles of questions. So here we have an example of a true or false. So this is going to give the reader an idea of what it is they've understood from the story, and you'll be able to depict from fact and from fiction. So what was true, what happened in the actual story, and what might have been false actually didn't happen in the story. And this is where your knowledge comes in of how to remember what happened in the story. Here we have a different example. Now in this particular example, they've given some chunk of information. You might not always have this chunk of information, but you will have the text in front of you. So it's always important to have that to hand. Now this example gives you 4 different summarised sentences. Now these are 4 main events that have happened in that small passage of writing. And what your job is to do is you need to put it in chronological order. And we know that chronological order is good. So put it in order of from start to finish. Okay. So these are 2 styles of questions that you might be asked. So we're going to have a go at doing one together. I'm going to show you how to do it. And then you're going to have a go together. So let's have a go at this style of question together. So question 1, below are summaries of different paragraphs from chapter 2 we have read today. Can you number them in order from 1 to 4 in the order that they happened? Now the first one has been done for you. So you will need to have a copy of the chapters in front of you, okay? So let's have a look at the beginning of chapter 2. So one of the dragons suggested they all hide from the humans. Rat told them that the humans were going to flood the caves. Rat announced to the crowd that humans were coming. So if we start with the first one, so the dragons all assembled outside Skatebeard's cave. So if I start at the beginning of the chapter, I can see as I work my way down that they'd all gathered outside his cave, where Firedrake then awoke them. So this is at the beginning of the chapter. Now if I skim the text, I need to have a look at, well, what's going to happen next? So one of the dragons suggested that they all hide from the humans. So now if I read along, so I'm looking for key words that I'm going to look at. So in my text, if I read the next part where the speech is, come up here, Rat, he said in a hoarse voice. Tell us what you saw and heard. Now that sentence comes just after all of the dragons have gathered. So I'm now going to have a look. And it said here that Rat told them that the humans were going to flood the caves. So that is going to be number 2, okay, because this is going to be the next one that happens. So Rat announced to the crowd that humans were coming, okay. So he's made the announcement, or she has made the announcement to all of the dragons, okay. Now I need to think about, well, what happened after she made the announcement? Well, I know from memory that the dragons had a reaction to it, so I need to have a look and find that reaction, okay? So if I look on page 7, I can see down from the bottom, it says, come up here, Rat, and tell us what you've heard. And obviously Rat goes on to explain that humans are coming. Now, if I read to the bottom of that paragraph, a groan ran through the ranks of the dragons. They raised their heads and pressed closer around the rock where Slatebeard stood. Okay, so here we have the reaction of how the dragons actually felt. And then you see that it moves on to explain why the humans are coming. Okay, now at the bottom with the reaction, it says, let's hide until they all go away, suggested another dragon. So, well, now this makes me think that one of the dragons suggested they all hide from the humans. So this is in response to the news that Rat gave them. So this is going to be number 3. Now, I know that this one's going to be number 4 because obviously I've now done it in the correct order, but I'm just going to double check. So I need to check that nowhere on those 2 pages has Rat mentioned anything about the humans flooding the caves. But if I now turn over onto page 8, we move into some more detail. So at the bottom of that page on page 8, Rat fiddled nervously with her whisker. It was no fun bringing bad news. They're going to flood the valley, she replied, her voice faltering. So we know the next part there is that Rat announces to everybody that the humans are going to flood the caves. So if I now check that in order, number 1, the dragons all assembled outside Skatebeard's cave. Number 2, Rat announced to the crowd that humans were coming. Number 3, one of the dragons suggested they all hide from humans. And number 4, Rat then told them that the humans were going to flood the caves. Now I can check that by reading my 2 pages to double check that that is indeed the correct order that they come in. So here's an opportunity for you to now have a go at doing this one on your own. So question number 2. Using the information from the text we have read today, tick one box to show whether the statement is true or false. Okay, now I haven't filled these in, but once you've had a go, I will go through the answers with you. So pause the screen. Do you think you can identify which statement's true and which statement is false? Okay, so let's go through these together. So Slatebeard is the oldest dragon in the valley. So the key word I think I might be looking for in there is I need to know who Slatebeard is. So I'm looking for the name Slatebeard in my text. And the question wants me to know whether he's the oldest dragon. Okay, so I need to find Slatebeard and the word oldest to see if I can read around that sentence that's going to tell me whether that statement is indeed true or false. So if I have a look, I'm going to start on my first page of my chapter. Well, I found Slatebeard as my first word. So Slatebeard, the oldest dragon in the valley. Well, now I can see oldest is in there as well. So if I have a look at this, it says Slatebeard is the oldest dragon in the valley. Well, I can see from my very first sentence that that is indeed true. So for that first one here, I can put a tick. Now the second one, all of the dragons assembled in daytime. So I'm looking for the word dragons, which is going to be in there, but also I've got my vocabulary there of the word we've looked at, assembled. So I need to be having a look for the word assembled in my sentence. So I'm going to have a scroll down on page 6 and I thought, oh, okay. So just at the end of that first paragraph, once all the other dragons had assembled outside Slatebeard's cave, Firedrake woke him. So I found the word assembled, but it doesn't tell me anywhere in that sentence the answer to my question. So I need to now read around it. So what other vocabulary words could I be looking at that might give me a clue? Well, I might be looking for the word daytime, or I might be looking for words that's going to suggest to me what time of day these dragons have actually assembled. So I'm going to read on. I'm going to see if it gives me any more clues. So the sun had set. Okay. Well, I know from my knowledge that when the sun sets, we're getting close to the evening time. So this is when the sun is starting to set. Now it said the sun had set. So we must be somewhere either between evening or nighttime. But I still haven't got a clear enough idea, so I'm going to read a little bit further. A black and starless sky lay over the valley and it was still raining. Well, now if I know it's a black and starless sky, I have completely no sun. I know that I'm now talking about the evening and I'm heading into nighttime. But my statement here says all the dragons assembled in daytime. Well, I know from the clues in the text that tells me that the sun had set and it was a black and starless sky. We're not talking about daytime. So I know that that statement there is going to be false. Let's have a look at number 3. Rat climbed up a tree to make her announcement. So I'm looking for some suggestion that we're having some description about rat. So I want to look for some paragraphs that have information about rat. But I might be using the keyword there of climbed. So that word might be in the text, and it's going to help me tell me what it is that she climbed up to make her announcement, because I know she stood on something. So I'm going to have a scan now onto page 7. And it says on here, the rat scampered nimbly. Now, I didn't look at the word climbed, but I know that maybe if I scampered, that might be another word for climbed. But I'm not quite sure, so let's have a look a bit further. So the rat scampered nimbly up the rock, climbed Slatebeard's tail, and crouched on his back. Now, the bit before says, come up here, rat. Tell us what you saw and heard. So this is a suggestion that rat's going to make an announcement. Now, I know she scampered up onto something, but it doesn't say here she scampered up to a tree. It says that she scampered nimbly up the rock. So I know it wasn't a tree that she climbed, but I know it was a rock. Now, the climb didn't give me a clue, but I can see the word scampered. So that's going to tell me that statement is indeed false. And the last one, Sorrel picked at some moss stuck between her teeth. So now I'm looking for a description of sorrel, and I'm looking for something to do with moss and maybe her teeth. So those are going to be the 3 words of sorrel, moss and teeth I'm looking for in the same sentence. So I know that this happened somewhere towards the end of the pages that we were looking at, because sorrel makes an announcement. So I'm going to skip to the end bit here. So the dragons turned to Firedrake and Sorrel. Rat's right, said Brownie. You have no idea. She spat on the ground and picked up a piece of moss. Okay, so the word moss is here. Let's read a bit further. Stuck in her teeth. Now, the reason why I needed to move on, because yes, she was picking at some moss, but there was nothing to say that moss might not have been somewhere else. It might have been stuck onto her claws. It might have been stuck between her fingers or her toes. So by reading on to the end of that sentence, I've actually confirmed that it was indeed moss, and it was indeed stuck between her teeth. So I know that this one here is going to be true. Okay? So you will need to make sure you identify keywords in your questions, and you can use those keywords to help scan the text. So from memory, I vaguely knew where different parts of those statements might be, so I didn't have to read the whole book. But it's a good skill to know if you're looking for small snippets of information. So your task for this lesson is you need to summarise the first chapter of Dragonrider. Okay, so we actually read the first chapter in yesterday's lesson, so you'll need to make sure you have a copy of that in front of you. I will also send home another copy of it as well. You may need to reread it if it helps you, if you've maybe forgotten a little bit, and it'll help you to support you with this task. So what you need to do is summarise the first chapter. Now you need to remember to only include the key events of the story, including characters, but not all the teeny tiny small details. So again, going back to our first task, imagine you're going to come and summarise it to me, and you've got 2 minutes to summarise the key points. You need to be succinct and you need to be small and to the point. How you choose to present this is entirely up to you. Okay, so you could do a storyboard, which is down here. We've done a couple of these in some of our topic work from last year, where you can draw a picture and a sentence underneath to summarise the events. You might just want to write it in a chunk paragraph. If that's how you're going to do it, you need to make sure you're including your clauses, your conjunctions, and some of your descriptive words. However, remember, you still need to be very close to the point. Or you might want to represent it using a flowchart, and obviously a flowchart goes in order of the story. So it's entirely up to you how you wish to present your work to me. But once you've done that, you can send that work on to me, and we will have a look at this in our lesson for tomorrow. Okay, good luck, year 5.